One of the most controversial changes that came with this week's Battlefield 6 update is the limb multipliers. Some players are saying this will make time to kill feel consistent, while others are saying it's unrealistic because arms and legs are usually not armored. And I think there are definitely some legitimate concerns here, but I think some of this criticism is missing a bigger point. Limb multipliers are not really about realism, but about shot placement mattering more. So today, I want to go over the cons, the pros, why I think this is good for Battlefield, and why the concerns may not be as big of a problem as people think, and then my overall takeaway. Overall, I think the biggest con here is that limb multipliers can make the time to kill feel less consistent. For example, as the same player with the same gun, you could have two engagements that are the same and feel similar but end differently. In one fight, most of your shots land upper torso and the enemy drops quickly, while in another fight, your aim is a little lower and you catch more arms and legs, and as a result, the weapon suddenly takes an extra bullet or two to kill. This can feel especially weird if the game does not clearly communicate why this has happened, while the other concern here is animations and hitbox priority. Because if someone's arms cross their chest while sprinting, while we're aiming, or while they're turning or vaulting, you could technically aim center mass, but the game could register as the arm instead, so this is where limb multipliers can also feel bad. And shooting somebody from the side here is probably a better example, because if I'm looking at their side and I'm shooting their shoulder or upper arm, then that bullet shouldn't in fact just hit their arm and magically stop, it should go through and do upper chest damage instead. So without limb penetration, limbs could basically become armor for the torso, and that would be a legitimate problem here, because the issue is not lower limb damage by itself, but the issue is if the game turns a clean shot into a weaker damage event purely because an arm or a hand got in the way. Now, when it comes to the pros of limb multipliers, this is why I still think it's a good and even better direction for Battlefield as a whole, because ultimately, limb multipliers reward better aim. And I'll rephrase it that way, instead of saying something along the lines of they punish bad aim, because the point here is not to make worse players suffer, the point is to make better shooting produce better results. If you're more accurate and more precise, landing your shots in the upper torso and head, you should be able to get a more reliable time to kill than if your shots are just loosely dragging across arms, legs, and the lower body. This creates a healthier skill gap within the game. It rewards tracking higher on the body, it rewards cleaner recoil control, and it rewards better target focus. Along with this, it also makes sloppy shooting less reliable without making the weapon itself feel random. Now, there is an interesting realism argument here, because some people will say limbs shouldn't do less damage because they don't have the armor that the rest of the body usually does, but I think that argument goes both ways here. I can't remember the game exactly, but there was a game where they experimented with armor protecting specific body parts, and when armor became really effective, players started aiming around it because unarmored areas ended up giving a faster time to kill. So to me, the realism argument here I think gets messy really fast. Because if we actually make armor matter by body part, then shooting unarmored limbs can become more rewarding than shooting center mass, and I think that can make some sense for a realistic purpose, but that's not automatically what Battlefield is geared toward. Even with the prior video, I discussed the difference between realism and being grounded. Battlefield can be grounded in realism while still taking into account actual gameplay implications and trying to have things balanced for overall gameplay purposes. So this is why I think the gameplay side matters more than the realism side. Battlefield doesn't need to be a trauma simulator that incorporates dismemberment mechanics, but it does need gunfights that feel fair, readable, consistent, and learnable. And overall, this is where I think the concern may not be as big of a problem as people think. I even went into a test range for Battlefield 6, and it does appear that limb penetration exists in the game. So if you shoot through a limb onto the body, then the game is still going to give you the higher body damage instead of treating the arm like some sort of magical absorber. So to me, I think the bigger question here is how consistent will all of this be in actual matches, because test range conditions are clean while real matches are not. Overall, players are doing a lot more in terms of movement, sliding, turning, jumping over things, but there's also a lot more going on in those matches for the servers to keep up with. Factor in how terrible the netcode has been to this point, and now you're starting to see where my real concern is. But the fact that limb penetration exists now is a good sign. It means the concern is not simply limb multipliers are bad here, the real concern is whether the system stays consistent during live gameplay. And that distinction matters because Battlefield 6 has already had inconsistency from random recoil. And that kind of inconsistency is extremely frustrating because it's one that the players can't easily overcome. However, the limb multipliers are different. They can create variance, yes, but that variance is tied to where your bullets are actually landing, while random recoil makes the weapon itself inconsistent. Limb multipliers make shot placement matter more, so these aren't the same problem at all. So overall, I think my takeaway here is pretty simple. I believe that limb multipliers are beneficial for Battlefield 6 as they give DICE another balance tool, they reward better aim, and they make gunfights less forgiving in a way that is actually tied to player input and skill. As for the concerns here, I think they're real, but they're mostly implementation concerns. If I shoot someone in the leg, lower damage is fine. If I shoot someone through the arm and shoulder into their chest, that shouldn't be treated as a limb-absorbed shot, but a chest shot instead. And again, from what I tested, Battlefield 6 already seems to account for that. So the real question here is whether the system stays consistent in actual matches. So what do you think? Are limb multipliers good or bad for Battlefield? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I'll catch you on the next one. RAMTEID out.